Welcome to the 6th chapter of the Book of Esther. Esther, again, is her name. Mentions again in the Hebrew it has Hadassah, but it only appears once. And that's in the Book of Esther. And Hadassah means myrtle, but there's no usage of that name anywhere in the Bible other than here, and it's not in the Greek as we mentioned. So it's Esther, and right away we see something here that's interesting. It says it starts out in the first 6th chapter, after we found out in the last chapter that Mordecai had planned, he cut down the tree, and it's called a timber, xylos, and it's 75 foot tall. And this is where he's going to hang Mordecai on. He has it all planned, tells his friends, his family. He's going to go there early in the morning, tell the king, and then kill Mordecai. And so it's already all set up for Mordecai, Haman, to do his dirty work. Of course, his name is in the Greek is Aman. But it says here, but the Lord, Kyrios, removed the sleep from the king that night. What's interesting here that it has Kyrios in the Greek, which is in the Hebrew would be the tetragrammaton of what's called Yahweh or Jehovah, whatever. It mentions his name. Now, of course, what do? You go to Wikipedia and you read Wikipedia on the Book of Esther, and right away it says the books of Esther and Song of Songs are the only books in the Hebrew Bible that do not explicitly mention God. And then there's a footnote for number 2, and you go down and you see that this David R. Blumenthal wrote a book or an article, Where God Is Not, the Book of Esther and the Song of Songs, retrieved April the 19th, 2016. Of course, these people that come in and write these articles in Wikipedia, basically on the Old Testament, try to destroy everything that's in the Old Testament. That the Genesis was written by more than 3-4 people, and all sorts of things. They're constantly trying to destroy the Bible, the Old Testament especially, and the people that do that are people of the New Testament, but I don't understand it. But this David Blumenthal apparently never read the Greek Old Testament. Now, I never checked with the Hebrew Bible. I should have probably, to see if that was true in the Hebrew Bible. It says it does not explicitly mention God, but here and down we get down in 13, it mentions God. So in the Hebrew Bible it is there, and you can look up in the Greek Bible, you can look up in the Hebrew Bible to find out if that was so. But anyway, be that as it may, the Lord, Kyrios, God, removed the sleep, the ipnu, from the king Vasileos. Remember we said basil plant, basilica, all these words have to do with royalty, kings, queens, and so forth, from the king that Nikta. Nikta, we have the word nocturnal that comes from that. So I'm sure we all have had experiences where we have woken up. Recently, it seems like I've had more than one, but that I are having a hard time going to sleep. Normally, I get 9 hours of sleep. You probably shudder and think of somebody getting that much sleep. But I read an article once of long sleepers, famous long sleepers that slept 9 hours or more a day, and Napoleon was one, it said. Anyway, the king couldn't sleep. So what does he do? He says, and he told his diakono to carry in a memorandum letters. A deacon comes from that, diakono, a deacon. Is a servant. And this is what servants are. Deacons are in churches. They're the servants that do the things that are necessary to be done. And so he carry in the memorandum grammata. We have grammar from that word, grammata, letters. Of the imeron, the days, ephemeral comes from that, to read to him. And he found grammata letters having been written concerning Mordecai, and was reported to the king what was reported to the king concerning the two eunuchs of the king. And we remember earlier, a couple of chapters earlier, 4 or 5, where Mordecai finds out and overhears these two eunuchs planning to kill King Artaxerxes, and he reports it to Esther, who reports it to the king, and the two eunuchs were put to death. So it mentions it being written down in the book of memory, but nothing happened in that period of time until now he's reading it, and it says, and so concerning the two eunuchs, during their watching, and they're seeking to put hands on Artaxerxes. That's the two eunuchs to kill King Artaxerxes. And the Vasilevs said, well, what doxin, our favor, did we do for Mordecai? Doxin, we have the doxology, the glory in the liturgy of the different churches that have liturgy. The doxa, doxology, glory. What glory or favor did we do? What did we give them? Did we give them any praise or higher office or whatever for Mordecai? Well, now apparently the king knew who Mordecai was because it mentions here that he knew he was outside in the courtyard, or he was a courtier, and he probably knew that Mordecai was a Jew because he says he was. Then and he was dressed in these tattered clothes, burlap, and had ashes strewn on him. And because of the letter that went out to kill all the Jews throughout his kingdom from India all the way down to Ethiopia. So I'm sure the king knew then who Mordecai was. Now how he related that with Haman's desire and design to kill all the Jews, and the king approved it and gave him the money. How the king balanced between the two, we don't know. It doesn't really say, but he did know. And then anyway, these servants, the diacony and the diacony of the Vasileos, said, well, we did not do for him one thing. And during the inquiring by the king concerning the goodwill of Mordecai, behold, Haman was in the courtyard, and Haman had planned, of course, the day before, telling his wife and friends that he's going to come in the morning and hang Mordecai on the 75-foot timber at his house, and then they were going to have a party and celebrate his getting rid of this man who would not do obeisance to him and disrespected him. And it's interesting that why Mordecai disrespected Haman. You would think that, well, if everybody's bowing down to somebody or whatever, you would just go along with them. But the Jews were different. We see this happens in different places. With Daniel, wouldn't bow down to the image that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. And so and then later he prayed towards Daniel prayed towards Jerusalem, where they weren't supposed to do, anybody was supposed to pray except for a period of time that was set up. And so Haman is just going along with this behavior that was set up by God, did not bow down or worship but to bow down to anybody but him. And so this was a disrespect. Now today, I don't think that now we're in the Christian era. Jesus has not put that on us, that we cannot bow down to a king. I mean, people have bowed down to all sorts of Christian kings and non-Christian kings, and so forth over thousands of years. And now whether or not the Jews still go along with this, maybe some would do that today, but or maybe not. I'm not sure, because I don't know. But anyway, so Mordecai disrespected Haman and wanted to kill him. So then the king said, well, who's in the courtyard? Because he wants to give Mordecai the the glory. And he entered, Haman, that is, entered to speak to the king to hang Mordecai upon the xylo, which he prepared. Now, the xylo it's not a tree anymore because he cut it down. In the xylo, we have the English word xylophone, comes from that. A xylophone has little wooden bars that you hit with a mallet and it makes a sound, and that's the word xylophone that comes from that word. But it's a piece of wood after the tree has been cut down, basically. Tree it is, but a dendron is a true Greek word for a tree. It's a live tree. It wouldn't be a xylo, although it could at one time if it's going to be cut down, so forth, into timber. Now, the reason I'm making a big deal out of this is in another chapter, I believe maybe the next chapter or so, that it calls it a stavros, and that's the same word that Jesus was put on in the New Testament. The stavros, he was nailed to the stavros, the timber. Now, that is the only place in the Old Testament that word will appear. I just want to bring it in now and show it because you can see its usage here, not stavros, but the tree, and it mentions about the person that's cursed can't hang on a tree overnight, and it's a curse to be put on a tree and so forth. People that were executed that way. In 5, it continues, in the diakoni, the servants of the Vasileos, said, well, behold, Aman stands in the courtyard, Haman. And the king said, well, call him in. And the king said to Aman, what shall I do to the man whom I want to extol? So Haman said to himself, well, who does the king want to extol unless it's me? This reminds me of the teaching of Christ about sitting at the first place, thinking of yourself and putting yourself at the top of and this was at the feast, and then when somebody greater than you comes, then you have to move and go all the way to the back. But the idea of setting ourselves up and thinking of ourselves, they're talking about us. We all fall into that trap, I'm sure, at one time or another. We have mirrors, and that's one thing. We look into the mirror and we see, who do we see? We see ourselves. And a lot of times we'll put ourselves into a position where somebody is going to do something to somebody or whatever, and we don't know who it's going to be, and we think, well, maybe it's going to be me. And I think we all do that, unless I'm the only one that has done that. But Aman or Haman has thought that way. Well, who else except me? And Haman said to the king, he said to the Vasilevs, as for the man whom the king wants to extol, anthropon, we have anthropology from that word, let the servants, now here it changes from the deacons to the servants. It's interesting. The servants of the king. So apparently the deacon was higher up because he was in there talking to the king, and so a deacon, it's a higher office than just a plain servant, because a servant, somebody that doesn't ever see the king, never even comes into the courtyard probably. So they say, Haman said, let the servants of the king bring fine linen apparel, a stolene or a stole, which is a robe, which the king, Vasilevs, puts on, and perivalite, actually it wraps around him. It's like a stole, one of those long robes, and he puts it around him, and it flows. Because this peri means around, and valo is to throw around, puts on. I should probably change that to puts around. And the horse, the epon, we have, of course, the hippopotamus, the epo for the horse, and the potamus is a river, and the horse upon which the Vasilevs mounts. And give it to one of the friends of the king, of the honorable ones. And Haman's telling the king to do all these things, to give it to a friend of the king, of the honorable ones, and he's thinking about himself because he's honorable, and robe the man, since thinking about himself. Oh, I'm going to get this beautiful robe and sit on the king's horse, and whom the king loves. Agapa, we have agape, comes from that. And mount him upon the epon, the horse, and let that man proclaim through the square of the city, saying, so shall it be done to every man whom the king extols. So he's telling the king to put the man on the horse, give him his clothes, and then have a high official walk around, which he's thinking is going to be himself, take this man around the city and yell out to everybody so shall it be done to every man whom the king extols. And Haman's probably sitting there, oh, this just feels so good. This is going to happen to me. Any minute now, I'm going to be going out in the city and everybody's going to be looking at me and I am going to be the center of attention to all these people. What more could I want? How better could life be than this? And the king said to Haman, you spoke well. You do thus to Mordecai the Jew, the one attending in the courtyard, and do not let fall from you a word which you spoke. So here he has all this plan on hanging Mordecai, and boy, how things change. God can change things in a second. We think we have everything planned, and all of a sudden, whammo, everything can turn good, everything can turn bad. God has his ways of doing things, and God kept the king from falling asleep and reading about Mordecai, and it changed the whole history of the world. Instead of destroying all the Jews lived, and we'll go through all of what happened. And Jesus came through it, and all kinds of wonderful things because of how the Lord had planned and let this plan of man fail. It says at one place that God laughs at the plans of kings and queens and rulers of this earth. He laughs at them because it's all in his plan, good or bad. And Haman took the stolene, the robe, and the epon, the horse, and he robed Mordecai. So he goes out, finds this man that he hates, and he gets to him and puts the robe on him, sits him on the horse, mounted him upon the horse, and went through the square of the city, the platias, we have the word plate from that, poleos, the metropolis, and proclaimed, saying, so it will be to every man the king wants to extol, hating every minute of it, I'm sure, and just horrible for Haman. And Mordecai returned to the courtyard. The problem hasn't been solved. The Jews are all still going to be killed. And Mordecai, this is his main concern. And so he goes back to the courtyard. Now Mordecai may very well have still had the tattered clothes, because it said when Queen Esther had the eunuch take out robes and take the burlap off of Mordecai, that Mordecai refused. He kept it on. So he probably still had that on. And here Haman has to go out and take all this dirty clothes. He's got ashes all over it. Take all of this off of this man who probably looked terrible and put this robe on and do all this. So Haman, it says, what happens? He returned to his own place fretting and with a downcast head, kaphalis, cephalic, that word. So his head is down, he's fretting, and just upset because everything he had planned on killing all the Jews, and Mordecai has completely failed. And Haman described the things coming to pass to Zeresh, his wife, and her name in the Greek is Zosara, and to his friends. And the friends and the wife said to him, well, since Mordecai is from the race of the Jews, and you began to be humbled before him, in falling, you shall fall, and in no way should you be able to defend against him. For the living God is with him. Here he is, the living God. Again, now we have God, where this man in Wikipedia, of course he said in Hebrew, so I didn't check it, so he may be correct as far as that. But God and Kyrios do both appear in the Greek edition of the Book of Esther. So God is with him. There's nothing you can do. It's all over. God has got control. And while they were yet speaking, the eunuchs came to hurry Haman unto the banquet which Esther prepared. Well, if Haman thought things were bad now, he is going to find out that things get even worse. And if you want to find out how worse they do get, we hope you'll join us in chapter 7 in the next video seminar, and hope you'll see you then. God bless.